The date is March 2nd, 2002. High in the snow-covered mountains of eastern Afghanistan, at elevations approaching 2 miles above sea level, American forces are about to embark on the largest combat operation since the fall of the Taliban. They call it Operation Anaconda. What begins as a 3-day mission to root out a few hundred demoralized fighters will transform into a brutal 17-day battle that will test the limits of American military power in the 21st century. This is the story of courage under fire, of plans that crumbled at first contact, of mistakes made and lessons learned in blood. This is the story of America's first major battle against Al-Qaeda, fought in one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. In the months following September 11, 2001, American forces swept through Afghanistan with stunning speed. Special operations teams, riding horseback alongside Northern Alliance fighters, called in devastating airstrikes that shattered the Taliban's grip on power. By December, the regime had fallen. Victory seemed within grasp. But wars rarely end so cleanly. Intelligence reports in January 2002 began painting a troubling picture. Somewhere in the Shah-i-Kot Valley, a remote stretch of mountains 60 miles south of Gardez, near the Pakistani border, enemy forces were gathering. The valley's name in Pashto means place of the king. For centuries, it had been a refuge for warriors. During the Soviet occupation, Mujahideen fighters had twice driven the Red Army out in defeat, using the valley's natural fortifications to devastating effect. Now Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters were returning to those same positions. The Shah-i-Kot was not just any valley. Its base sat at 7,500 feet above sea level. The mountains surrounding it climbed thousands of feet higher. The terrain was a defender's dream. Limited access points, natural firing positions carved into rock faces, and caves that had been fortified over decades of warfare. American commanders knew they had to act. The failure to capture Osama bin Laden at Tora Bora still haunted them. Operation Anaconda would be different. This time, American boots would be on the ground in force. Major General Franklin Hagenbach of the 10th Mountain Division took command. His plan was elegant, a classic hammer and anvil operation. American forces would establish blocking positions along the ridgelines, sealing off escape routes. Afghan militia forces, supported by American special forces, would advance into the valley, the hammer, driving Al-Qaeda fighters into the anvil of waiting American troops. Intelligence estimates suggested the valley held 200 to 300 lightly armed, demoralized fighters. The operation was expected to last 3 days. 1,700 American troops prepared to air assault into the valley. Another 1,000 pro-government Afghan militia would join them. On paper, Operation Anaconda looked textbook, but the mountains of Afghanistan have a way of tearing up textbooks. The intelligence was catastrophically wrong. The valley didn't hold 200 or 300 fighters. It held as many as 1,000, and they weren't demoralized. They were waiting in fortified positions. They had heavy weapons, mortars, and RPGs, and they had no intention of running. As the helicopters began their approach in the early morning darkness of March 2nd, the trap was set. The plan began to unravel almost immediately. As American helicopters carrying troops from the 101st Airborne and 10th Mountain Division descended toward their landing zones, the mountains erupted in fire. Mortar rounds exploded around the aircraft. Machine gun tracer fire streaked through the darkness. The enemy wasn't surprised. They were ready. The Afghan militia forces who were supposed to form the hammer of the attack advanced tentatively. Within hours after taking casualties, they simply stopped fighting and withdrew. The entire southern axis of the American plan, the hammer, had evaporated. American troops on the ground suddenly found themselves in a fight they hadn't expected. The soldiers attempting to secure a position codenamed Objective Ginger came under withering fire from entrenched positions they couldn't see. The enemy held the high ground. Every rock face, every cave opening, every ridgeline seemed to conceal fighters with clear fields of fire. This wasn't a mop-up operation. This was a pitched battle. The altitude itself became an enemy. At 8,000 to 10,000 feet, helicopters struggled to generate lift. The thin air robbed engines of power and soldiers of stamina. Every movement felt like running through molasses, and the bitter mountain cold made everything harder. Meanwhile, air support, the backbone of American military power, struggled to arrive when needed. Soldiers pinned down by enemy fire waited agonizing minutes, sometimes hours, for requested strikes. Communications broke down, coordination faltered. And then came Roberts Ridge. On the night of March 3rd, commanders decided they needed better intelligence. 2 SEAL reconnaissance teams were ordered to establish observation posts on high ground. One team, designated Mako 30, was assigned to the peak of Takur Gar Mountain, the highest point in the southern end of the valley. The plan began to unravel almost immediately. As American helicopters carrying troops from the 101st Airborne and 10th Mountain Division descended toward their landing zones, the mountains erupted in fire. Mortar rounds exploded around the aircraft. Machine gun tracer fire streaked through the darkness. The enemy wasn't surprised. They were ready. The Afghan militia forces who were supposed to form the hammer of the attack advanced tentatively. Within hours after taking casualties, they simply stopped fighting and withdrew. The entire southern axis of the American plan, the hammer, had evaporated. American troops on the ground suddenly found themselves in a fight they hadn't expected. The soldiers attempting to secure a position codenamed Objective Ginger came under withering fire from entrenched positions they couldn't see. The enemy held the high ground. Every rock face, every cave opening, every ridgeline seemed to conceal fighters with clear fields of fire. This wasn't a mop-up operation. This was a pitched battle. The altitude itself became an enemy. At 8,000 to 10,000 feet, helicopters struggled to generate lift. The thin air robbed engines of power and soldiers of stamina. Every movement felt like running through molasses, and the bitter mountain cold made everything harder. Meanwhile, air support, the backbone of American military power, struggled to arrive when needed. Soldiers pinned down by enemy fire waited agonizing minutes, sometimes hours, for requested strikes. Communications broke down, coordination faltered. And then came Roberts Ridge. On the night of March 3rd, commanders decided they needed better intelligence. 2 SEAL reconnaissance teams were ordered to establish observation posts on high ground. One team, designated Mako 30, was assigned to the peak of Takur Gar Mountain, the highest point in the southern end of the valley. The mission was supposed to be routine: land under cover of darkness, establish a hidden observation post, and direct airstrikes. But when their Chinook helicopter, callsign Razor 03, approached the peak at 3 a.m. on March 4th, routine died instantly. The enemy was already there, waiting in the darkness. Machine gun fire ripped through Razor 03 before it could even touch down. Rounds punched through the helicopter's thin skin. An RPG streaked past. The aircraft lurched violently. Inside, Navy SEAL Petty Officer First Class Neil Roberts lost his grip and tumbled out the open rear ramp into the darkness, falling onto the snow-covered mountain peak. The pilot fought to control the damaged aircraft, but staying meant certain death for everyone aboard. He pulled away, leaving Roberts alone on the mountain. Roberts was alive, but he was surrounded. What happened next remains partially obscured by darkness, but recovered evidence paints a grim picture. He fought, alone against multiple enemy fighters, at 10,000 feet. In the dark, Navy SEAL Neil Roberts fought until he could fight no more. The rescue attempt that followed would become one of the most brutal small-unit actions in modern American military history. Razor 03 crash-landed further down the mountain. A rescue helicopter carrying Air Force Combat Controller Technical Sergeant John Chapman and the remaining SEALs was immediately dispatched to recover Roberts. The helicopter touched down in darkness on the contested peak, and the rescue team poured out into a maelstrom of gunfire. Chapman immediately spotted an enemy bunker and charged uphill through thigh-deep snow. Under fire from multiple positions, he assaulted the bunker alone, killing the enemy fighters inside and temporarily silencing their machine gun. But there were more bunkers surrounding them. Chapman moved into the open again, engaging a second bunker. Enemy rounds found him. He went down. The SEAL team leader, believing Chapman was dead and with his team taking casualties, made the agonizing decision to withdraw off the peak. They moved downslope, breaking contact, calling for immediate air support and reinforcements. But Chapman wasn't dead. This fact wouldn't be discovered until 14 years later, when Predator drone footage was reanalyzed with new technology. The video revealed an almost unbearable truth. After his teammates withdrew, Chapman regained consciousness. Alone, surrounded by enemy fighters, grievously wounded, he got back up and continued fighting. For nearly an hour, he engaged enemy positions by himself, drawing fire away from the Americans regrouping below. When a quick reaction force helicopter finally arrived, Chapman emerged from cover one final time, exposing himself to enemy fire to provide covering fire for the incoming Americans. That's when enemy rounds found him for the last time. Technical Sergeant John Chapman died alone on Roberts Ridge, fighting to the very end. In 2018, he would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first airman since the Vietnam War to receive the nation's highest recognition for valor. But the battle for Roberts Ridge wasn't over. At dawn, an Army Ranger Quick Reaction Force aboard another Chinook approached the peak. The helicopter was still 20 feet in the air when it was hit by a barrage of automatic weapons fire and rocket-propelled grenades. The aircraft crashed hard onto the mountain. Before the Rangers could even clear the helicopter, the right door gunner was killed. 3 Rangers died within seconds. For the next 17 hours, the survivors fought a desperate battle for survival on that frozen ridge. Air Force Senior Airman Jason Cunningham, a pararescue jumper, treated wounded soldiers for hours despite being severely wounded himself. He would not survive. The Rangers and Special Operations personnel on Roberts Ridge held their ground against repeated enemy assaults, calling in airstrikes that turned the peak into an inferno. F-15s, F-16s, A-10 Warthogs, and AC-130 gunships pounded enemy positions with everything from laser-guided bombs to 105mm cannon fire. By late afternoon, with air support hammering the enemy and reinforcements finally arriving, American forces secured Roberts Ridge. But the cost had been terrible. 7 Americans dead, more wounded. It was the deadliest single engagement of Operation Anaconda. The battle for Roberts Ridge became a rallying point for American forces throughout the Shah-i-Kot Valley. The rules of engagement changed. Air support was ramped up dramatically. More troops were committed. What had begun as a 3-day operation stretched into 17 days of sustained combat. Day by day, American forces adapted. When initial plans failed, new ones were devised. When Afghan militia proved unreliable, more American troops were airlifted in. The battle became a crucible that revealed both weaknesses and strengths in how America fought wars. Artillery pounded suspected enemy positions. Attack helicopters hunted for targets in the ridgelines. Precision strikes destroyed cave complexes. Slowly, methodically, American forces cleared the valley, ridge by ridge, cave by cave. The enemy fought back with skill and determination. These weren't the demoralized remnants intelligence had predicted. They were hardened fighters who had battled the Soviets in these same mountains. They used the terrain expertly, disappearing into caves only to re-emerge elsewhere. But against the weight of American firepower and the determination of American soldiers, they could not hold. By March 9th, Objective Ginger was finally secured. By March 16th, surviving enemy forces had withdrawn, most escaping across the border into Pakistan. On March 19th, Operation Anaconda was officially declared complete. 8 Americans had been killed, all Special Operations Forces, and approximately 50 wounded. Afghan allies had lost 3 killed. Enemy casualties were harder to determine, with estimates ranging from 50 to 500. The valley was secured, but many enemy fighters had escaped. Operation Anaconda was declared a success, and in many ways it was. American forces had defeated a determined enemy in extraordinarily difficult terrain at high altitude. They had adapted under fire, overcome bad intelligence and failed plans, and ultimately secured their objective. But the battle revealed uncomfortable truths about how America waged war. Intelligence had been fundamentally flawed. The assumption that the enemy would simply flee had been disastrously wrong. Reliance on local Afghan forces had proven misplaced. Air-ground coordination had been inadequate. Communications had failed at crucial moments. In the months that followed, the military took these lessons to heart. Many of the problems encountered at Anaconda were corrected. Air-ground integration improved. Communications were enhanced. Planning became more realistic. In that sense, Anaconda served its purpose. It taught the American military how to fight its first battles of the 21st century. But there was another lesson. Operation Anaconda would be the last major set-piece battle in Afghanistan for many years. The enemy learned they couldn't defeat American forces in direct combat, so they stopped trying. The war evolved into an insurgency that would drag on for 2 decades, outlasting the careers of the soldiers who fought at Anaconda, outlasting multiple American presidents, becoming America's longest war. That frozen ridge in the Shah-i-Kot Valley became a symbol of both valor and the complexity of modern warfare. Technical Sergeant Chapman and Master Chief Petty Officer Britt Slabinski would later receive the Medal of Honor for their actions on Roberts Ridge. Others received the Air Force Cross, the Navy Cross, Silver Stars, America's highest decorations for valor. They earned every one of them. In those desperate hours on that mountain peak and in the days of fighting throughout the valley, American service members displayed the kind of courage that defines a generation. They fought not for glory or politics, but for each other. When plans failed and things went wrong, they adapted and kept fighting. When the mission seemed impossible, they found a way. That's the real story of Operation Anaconda. Not the intelligence failures or the planning mistakes, but the men who fought despite those failures. In circumstances that would break weaker soldiers, they proved themselves against a determined enemy in conditions almost beyond human endurance. The Shah-i-Kot Valley is quiet now. The caves still scar the mountainsides. The peaks still reach toward the sky. And on Roberts Ridge, the snow still falls on ground made sacred by sacrifice. Operation Anaconda was America's first major battle of the 21st century. The lessons it taught, in blood and courage, echo through every conflict that followed. The men who fought there, living and dead, deserve to be remembered. Not for the mistakes made in planning rooms far from the fighting, but for what they did when everything went wrong. They stood their ground, they fought back, and they brought each other home. That is the measure of their valor. That is the legacy of Operation Anaconda.